Jonathan Roumie stood motionless as if the moment itself had forgotten how to breathe. In front of him, bank manager Camille Hartley pointed a trembling manicured finger toward the revolving glass doors. Her voice, though low, sliced through the sterile hum of the Fifth Avenue branch like a scalpel dipped in contempt. "I don't care who you think you are," she said, every syllable laced with outrage. "Take your religious nonsense and get out of my bank." The small silver cross around his neck caught the light just for a moment, casting a flicker of warmth across the floor's cold marble tiles. Around him the lobby shifted. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. Whispers rose like steam in a pressure cooker about to burst. Phones came out. The air became electric. Jonathan didn't flinch. His hands stayed calm. His fingers drifting up to the cross, a quiet instinct more than a defense. And as humiliation bubbled inside his chest, he did not speak. Not yet. Not while the moment demanded silence. Across the room, people exchanged glances, unsure whether to be offended, entertained, or inspired. Some stepped back. Others leaned in. Something bigger than a bank policy dispute was unfolding, and they could feel it. Behind the marble counter, Camille Hartley stood like a monument to Upper Manhattan power. Ice-cold eyes, flawless navy suit, and decades of gatekeeping wealth and worth coiled tightly into her posture. She wasn't just reacting to a customer. She was defending her fortress. Jonathan finally spoke softly. "Ma'am," he said, not bitterly, "I simply asked about opening a charitable foundation account." The voice, that calm, clear-grounded voice, millions knew it, had wept with it, had listened to it speak the words of Christ on screens in bedrooms and churches and dark hospital rooms where hope was hard to find. But Camille wasn't hearing that voice. Not really. Her focus had already zeroed in on the silver cross. Not the man, not his intent, just the symbol and the story she had projected onto it. What had started as a courteous meeting just 5 minutes earlier had spiraled into this. He had approached her desk, humbly, respectfully, removing his baseball cap. The unmistakable face of Jonathan Roumie. Yes, that Jonathan Roumie was now revealed to the world. The man who had carried the burden and blessing of playing Jesus for a generation. But Camille's smile had faded the moment her eyes dropped to his chest, to the cross. "Are you trying to turn my bank into some kind of religious recruitment center?" She had snapped her tone louder than necessary, drawing attention like blood in water. Jonathan had blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." "I don't understand," he said gently. "I'm here to talk about financial services." Not, but she had already cut him off. A hand slicing the air. A line drawn. And now, here he stood, at the center of it all. Customers were caught between discomfort and fascination. An elderly woman near the ATM clutched her handbag as if protecting it from invisible forces. A young father instinctively moved in front of his daughter. The security guard by the door fidgeted, unsure whether this was a spiritual standoff or a PR nightmare. "This is a place of business, not a church," Camille declared, her voice echoing off vaulted ceilings. "We serve everyone equally here, and I won't allow anyone to make others uncomfortable with their religious displays." The irony of her statement was not lost on the onlookers. Her voice preached equality, but her posture whispered prejudice. Some exchanged quiet glances, the kind of looks New Yorkers give when they smell hypocrisy, but aren't sure how loudly they want to name it. Jonathan didn't respond with heat. He'd been here before, not here in this building, but here in the experience of being misunderstood. He'd grown up on these very streets, the son of immigrants from Syria and Italy. His parents had taught him dignity even when dignity wasn't returned. His path to becoming a household name, the face of a savior, had not been easy. The years before, the chosen had been filled with rejection, near breakthroughs and odd jobs that barely paid for rent and frozen pizza. And now he was being asked to leave a bank for wearing a cross and asking a question. But friends, this is not the end of the story. The cross wasn't for show. It had never been for show. That simple silver necklace, now the epicenter of this quiet storm, had once rested in the hands of a dying woman. Jonathan's grandmother had placed it there years ago, just days before her final breath. "Wear this," she had whispered, "when the world forgets who you are." He wore it daily, through auditions that led nowhere, through nights when ramen was dinner and doubt was dessert, through Hollywood meetings where faith was treated like a character flaw. And now it glimmered under the sterile light of a Manhattan bank lobby, mistaken for a threat. "I understand if you're busy," Jonathan said calmly. "Perhaps I could speak with someone else about the foundation account." His voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It simply was like the stillness that follows a storm. A grace so profound it made Camille Hartley tremble, not from fear but fury. To her, his calmness was defiance. His refusal to escalate, an insult. And in that twisted logic of insecure authority, she doubled down. Around them, the crowd shifted. Customers murmured to each other, disbelief mounting like static. Behind the teller windows, bank staff traded wide-eyed glances. This place, usually filled with the soft click of pens and the hum of transactions, now vibrated with moral tension. One employee, a seasoned teller named Lucinda Morales, watched it all unfold. Her hands worn but steady, had counted cash and offered smiles to this community for 15 years. And in all that time, she had never witnessed such raw hostility from management. Not like this. She looked at Jonathan, not the actor, not the name on streaming platforms, but the man. And what she saw stirred something old and sacred in her. Goodness, quietly standing, unmoving. Camille's voice pierced the moment once again. "I want this incident documented," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the security cameras. "This man came in here trying to push his religious agenda on our customers. It was a statement so bizarre, so inflated, it hung in the air like incense, sweetly absurd and sacredly offensive all at once." Jonathan said nothing. But what Camille didn't know, what no one here could have guessed, was that just 3 weeks ago, Jonathan had walked into this same branch quietly, without fanfare or recognition, and changed someone's life forever. Eleanor Park was a single mother. Her son, 10 years old, had been battling cancer. The treatments had drained every cent they had. Bills piled up. Foreclosure loomed. The math didn't add up and hope was fading. Through a mutual friend at church, Jonathan heard her story. No cameras, no press release, just compassion. He paid off her $47,000 debt anonymously. Just like that. And now, as fate or maybe something higher would have it, Elena Park stood right there in line at the customer service window, watching the man who had saved her family's future get humiliated over a necklace. Her heart pounded. Her breath caught. That's him, not the actor. Not the miracle worker on screen. The real man. The one who quietly walked the walk while the world watched someone else talk the talk. Elena stepped forward. She wasn't planning to. She wasn't bold by nature. But grace, when received deeply, turns even the shyest into lion-hearted witnesses. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice uncertain at first, but steadying with every syllable. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Camille turned slowly, her posture rigid with irritation. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your place in line." But Grace had already moved Elena past politeness. Jonathan caught her eye. Just a tiny shake of his head. A gentle plea. Don't get involved. He'd seen too many good people get burned trying to stand in fires they didn't start. But Elena had seen Christ, not in stained glass, but in this man. And when you've met the real thing, you can't be silent in the face of a counterfeit storm. She reached into her purse with trembling hands, pulling out something she never thought she'd show a soul in public: a letter. The letter confirming the payment. The one that saved her home. She stepped closer. The tension in the bank lobby had become too thick to ignore. It seeped into cubicles and teller windows, crept along the tile floors, and settled into the silence between heartbeats. From the upper level, Daniel Seo, the assistant manager, had been watching. For 3 years he'd worked under Camille Hartley, and for 3 years he'd made quiet notes, mental tally marks of moments that didn't sit right. The way Camille handled certain customers, the subtle tone, shifts, the decisions that somehow always aligned with an invisible but undeniable hierarchy of worth. He told himself they were isolated incidents, that maybe he was reading too much into things, that professionalism sometimes looked cold, but not today. Today the mask had slipped. Camille wasn't just enforcing policy, she was wielding it, like a weapon sharpened by ego and fear. Ever since her promotion, something had shifted. The rush of power that came with controlling mortgages, approvals, and access it had changed her. Or maybe it had revealed her. Jonathan, standing calmly, was everything her world had never prepared her for. Not angry, not defensive, just present. And the sight of it, the integrity, the peace, the faith had triggered something brittle inside her. Something she couldn't name, so she labeled it dangerous. Security. Camille called out, her voice cracking with corporate confidence. "Please escort this man out." But the man walking toward her wasn't just an employee in a pressed uniform. Marcus Washington had seen darker storms. A former Marine turned security guard. Marcus had spent his mornings kneeling in the back pews of St. Thomas before clocking in. He knew what real threats looked like, and Jonathan Roumie wasn't one of them. He approached slowly, hand resting on his walky eyes, steady as stone. There was no fear in his body language, just quiet discernment. "Is there a problem here, Miss Hartley?" he asked, his tone even respectful. But his gaze had already scanned the room. He saw Jonathan's stillness, the gathering crowd, the whispered concern. And he saw her, Camille, losing control of a narrative she had tried to author alone. "This gentleman seems to be conducting himself appropriately," Marcus added. The words weren't loud, but they carried. And they carried weight. You could feel it the moment when the room shifted, when the uncertainty began to give way to recognition. Something was wrong here, but it wasn't Jonathan. From the corner, a man in a tailored suit took a step forward. He'd been calculating risk for decades in Manhattan boardrooms, and what he saw now was a liability waiting to explode. Nearby, a young mother whispered anxiously into her phone. One or two people began filming discreetly. Camille's whole argument that this was about comfort and policy was unraveling in real time. Her behavior wasn't preventing disruption. It was the disruption. And yet, Jonathan stood firm, still, peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from knowing the storm doesn't define the sea. His hands, loosely clasped, didn't tremble. His face didn't flinch. He wasn't here to win. He was here to witness. Inside him, the voice of his grandmother echoed. "Mijo, when people attack your faith, they're not attacking you. They're wrestling with something broken inside themselves." Those words were no longer just wisdom. They were armor. "And Camille," she cracked, "I don't need to explain myself to any of you," she snapped. The mask gone now. Her voice edged with panic, disguised as pride. "This is my bank. I decide who's welcome here." The words fell like ice on a summer breeze, unnatural, jarring, and wrong. Around the lobby, customers began gathering their things. Not in protest, not loudly, but with the quiet finality of people who just decided to take their business and their dignity elsewhere. In trying to assert control, Camille was hemorrhaging it. And then, Elena Park stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut. "This man," she began, her hand shaking, "just slightly helped my family when we had nowhere else to turn." Silence spread like sunrise. Every head turned. Jonathan looked down, embarrassed by the attention. But Elena held her ground. She didn't quote policy. She didn't challenge authority. She just told the truth. "He paid off our debt, $47,000, quietly. No cameras, no spotlight. My son is alive, and we still have a home. Because of him." It wasn't a performance. It was testimony. And sometimes that's all you need to wake the sleeping conscience of a crowd. One by one, the customers leaned in, not out of curiosity, but reverence. They were witnessing something sacred disguised as a banking dispute, something holy buried beneath paperwork and protocol. And it wasn't over yet. There were things Elena Park didn't say. She didn't say how Jonathan had quietly insisted that no one know his name, that even the assistant who handled the transaction was told to erase all records that could trace it back to him. All Jonathan asked was one simple thing: just pay it forward when you can. The parish deacon who'd helped arrange it, Deacon Matteo, a man worn down by the apathy of wealthy donors who praised charity but rarely practiced it, had been stunned by Jonathan's first question. How much does she need? Not what's the story. Not is she a member of the church. Just how much? That moment had restored something in Deacon Matteo. A small flicker of belief that celebrity faith didn't have to be shallow, that spiritual integrity could still survive red carpets and production trailers. And now, all of that. Eleanor's voice. Jonathan's silence, the stillness in the air was reshaping the room. Even Camille Hartley could feel it. Her confidence began to flicker like a candle in wind. "I don't care what he supposedly did outside this bank," she said, but her tone was thinner now, a shadow of its former sharpness. "He cannot use this institution to promote his religious beliefs." The words rang hollow, even to her own ears. Across the lobby, Daniel Seo stepped forward, his employee badge catching the light. He had tried to stay quiet, tried to keep his head down and avoid conflict. But at some point, neutrality becomes complicity. He cleared his throat and spoke with the calm urgency of a man trying to salvage both justice and his job. "Ms. Hartley, perhaps we could handle this in your office," he said gently. "I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstanding privately." His suggestion was a lifeline, a way out, a final exit ramp before the situation went completely off the rails. But Camille didn't take it. She was too deep in the performance of control, too far into the role of gatekeeper to back down now. And Jonathan, he noticed, he had once stood on sound stages built to look like ancient Jerusalem. He'd delivered sermons with dust on his sandals and cameras in his face. But what he felt now was something older, something more real. A strange sense of kinship with early Christians, those who'd gathered in caves and catacombs, who were misjudged, misunderstood, and often mistreated, not for preaching, but for simply being. He looked down at the cross resting on his chest. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't branding. It was a banner, a quiet declaration that said, "Love anyway." And then Marcus Washington spoke again. He stood tall but soft, a man of muscle and mercy. "Ma'am," he said slowly, carefully, "I don't see any security threat here. Perhaps this is more of a customer service issue." It was his final offer, a way for Camille to back away without shame. A door marked dignity, but instead of stepping through it, she turned on him. "I don't need security advice from you," she snapped. The tone, the weight of that "you." It hung heavy in the air, toxic and unmistakable. Several customers visibly recoiled. Others looked down, uncomfortable. The words were too sharp, too personal, too familiar. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd been through worse. But the line had been crossed, and everyone knew it. Across the lobby, murmurs rose into full voices. People stopped pretending not to watch. An elderly woman near the foreign exchange window shook her head and whispered, "What's this world coming to?" A man in a tailored suit finally looked up from his phone, recognizing Jonathan from somewhere and realizing he wasn't watching a celebrity moment. He was witnessing something sacred. Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his spiritual director. "How was your morning meditation?" He smiled. A weary smile. The kind that knows irony when it shows up with perfect timing. Because this moment was his meditation. A test of silence, of mercy, of letting God defend you when words would only muddy the water. He didn't need to explain himself. The truth was speaking through the people around him. Friend, sometimes the world will try to define you by misunderstanding. It will twist your kindness into threat, your silence into defiance. But you don't have to fight fire with fire. You can stand in grace, in peace, in stillness. If you've ever been misjudged for your values, for your beliefs, for your quiet attempts to do good, drop the words "Grace speaks louder" in the comments. Let's remind each other that sometimes the loudest message is lived, not shouted, because the story is not done, and the next moment will take your breath away. The timing felt ordained, not coincidental, not random, but divinely appointed. Jonathan knew it deep in his bones. This was not merely a scene, not merely a confrontation. This was prayer, living prayer. A moment where faith had to be embodied, not acted. The pressure was immense, yet beneath the strain, something deeper held him. He drew in a long breath, steadying himself with the stillness that came from years of quiet spiritual discipline. Around him, Victoria's accusations burned, and the crowd's restlessness stirred like a rising tide. But his soul stayed rooted, and then a voice, soft but firm. It was Sarah Chen. You could almost hear the quiet turning of a page in her spirit as she remembered the words of her son Daniel. From his hospital bed, spoken with a clarity only children near the edge of life seem to have. Mama. When something good happens to us, we have to be brave enough to tell people, so they don't give up. Those words were oxygen to a flickering flame. Sarah reached into her purse with trembling fingers and pulled out a letter. A letter she had written long ago, meant for Jonathan's foundation, never mailed. Too scared, too self-conscious. Why would someone like him ever care what a nobody like me thinks, she had told herself. But now that fear was gone, I have something to read, she announced. The words echoed off the marble and glass, slicing through the tension like a violin note in a war zone. Victoria raised her hand sharply, trying to silence her as if power and poise were still hers to command. But Sarah didn't shrink. She wasn't the same woman who once begged for mercy in this very bank branch, tears in her eyes, clutching overdue mortgage papers. "This man saved my family," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but it wasn't fear. It was conviction. She opened the letter, hands no longer trembling, and the truth began to spill quiet at first. Then, with a power no one in that lobby was prepared for, she told them of what Jonathan had done, not just paying off medical debt, but 3 months of mortgage payments. Weekly groceries delivered for months, no camera crews, no photos, no grand announcement. Just a man hearing about a family in need and responding, not like a celebrity but like a shepherd. Victoria stiffened, her power unraveling with every word read aloud. The letter had never been sent, and yet now it was doing something that no social media post or press conference ever could. It was bearing Jonathan's soul to the room, his quiet mercy, his hidden compassion, his unmarketed faith. The lobby transformed. People stopped what they were doing. The digital chimes of bank transactions silenced. Conversations halted, and a stillness descended, reverent and raw. One woman held her hand to her chest. A man by the ATM wiped his eyes. Another whispered, "Amen." The very spiritual presence Victoria had tried to expel from her workplace was now flooding it. not through preaching, but through testimony. Sarah's voice was now rising. Dear Mr. Roumie, I will never be able to thank you enough for what you did for my family. When Daniel was sick and we thought we'd lose our home, you appeared like an angel in our darkest hour. Jonathan lowered his gaze, humbled, embarrassed, exposed, but also at peace. Perhaps he thought this was the reason for the chaos, for the confrontation, for the public humiliation. Maybe this was what his grandmother meant when she spoke of bearing the cross not for one's own glory, but so others might witness what love looks like in flesh and bone. He met Sarah's eyes and nodded. A small gesture, but it spoke volumes. You may finish. Go ahead. And she did. She read how Jonathan had contacted a local church, making sure Daniel had everything he needed for recovery, even a warm coat. How? When she tried to thank him, he replied, Don't thank me. Thank God. And help someone else when you can. It was quiet in the room now, but not dead, alive. Faith was no longer an idea in this space. It was visible. And Victoria. Her face had gone through several shades crimson fuchsia, and finally, a stunned pale stillness. Her weaponized attack now looked petty, vindictive. She had accused a man of pushing religion, but it turned out he'd only ever pushed groceries, rent payments, hope. It wasn't religion on trial anymore. It was love. And love had just handed the courtroom its evidence. At the security desk, Marcus Washington, the man in uniform who had watched hundreds of angry customers and corporate protocols pass through his lobby, now felt something shift in his chest. As Sarah read, he recognized something rare, real discipleship. No Instagram filters, no clickbait, just gospel in motion. He blinked hard, trying not to show emotion. But it was too late. A single tear traced down his cheek, hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Nearby, Robert Kim, the assistant manager, pulled out his phone not to record, not to tweet, but to quietly send a message to the regional office. We have a situation developing here. You need to see this for yourself. Have you ever had a moment like Sarah's, where fear tried to silence you but love gave you the strength to speak anyway? Let us know in the comments below. And if you've ever been the quiet helper, the one who gave in secret, thank you. Your story might never get read in a bank lobby, but heaven is listening. Stay with us. What happens next will shake the very foundation this bank was built on. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that bell. Your support brings these stories to life. He could see it now, clear as day. What was unfolding in that bank lobby wasn't just a public relations disaster brewing for the institution. It was a moment that cracked open something far deeper. For Jonathan Roumie, this wasn't about policies or press releases anymore. It was about a spiritual mirror being held up to modern life. And the reflection, it wasn't pretty. Then from the crowd stepped a man who carried that silent but unmistakable aura of boardroom power. His tailored suit, his calm confidence, this was someone who'd won battles without ever raising his voice. Excuse me, he said, turning to face Victoria with the tone of someone used to people listening. But I believe you're making a very serious mistake. Now, friends, I want you to feel that moment because everyone in that lobby felt it. The man's presence was like flipping a switch. You know the type: educated, respected, successful, and most importantly, charitable. A man whose name opened doors across the city. And right now, he was throwing his full weight behind Jonathan. Victoria, who had spent years perfecting a tone of polished condescension, suddenly found herself surrounded by resistance. Sarah's calm, powerful testimony, the murmurs from other customers. Now, this unexpected heavyweight publicly questioning her judgment. Her carefully manicured authority began to collapse. Like a sandcastle meeting the tide, she'd backed herself into a theological corner, one that had nothing to do with scripture and everything to do with prejudice. Meanwhile, Jonathan's mind drifted. Isn't it strange how the mind wanders in moments like these? He remembered something Dallas Jenkins had once told him about playing Christ on screen. The hardest part, Dallas had said, isn't the lines. It's when people expect you to be perfect off-screen because of the role you play. This was that moment. No cameras, no director, just real life and a test. A test to live out the grace he'd been portraying for others to watch. And just when you thought the room had peaked in tension, an elderly woman shuffled forward. A walker steadied her steps, but her voice, oh, it cut through the air like a blade of truth. Young lady? She addressed Victoria, her words precise and laced with righteous fire. I've banked here for 40 years. I've never seen anything so shameful from someone in management. Now pause here, friends. You ever heard an elder drop truth like that? It's not loud, but it's final. Victoria looked like a child in the face of a school teacher's disappointment. No debate, no recovery, just raw accountability. Sarah quietly folded her letter, her part complete. She had said enough. And somehow, this place, this sterile fluorescent-lit bank, had become a kind of sanctuary. Not of marble or stained glass, but of witness, of truth spoken plainly, of prejudice being undone by compassion. None of them yet knew the full truth that Jonathan's foundation had quietly, anonymously supported dozens of families in this very city. He never wanted attention, just change. A lesson handed down from his grandmother. If giving feels like a performance, it's not giving. It's theater. And now, outside the bank, a black Mercedes pulled into the loading zone. Inside, Margaret Thompson, the regional manager. She stepped out, briskly, clipboard in hand. The kind of executive who could read a balance sheet and a room with equal skill. She had no idea the storm she was about to walk into. Inside, Victoria made one final desperate attempt to cling to her sinking ship. I don't care what any of you think, she snapped, pointing again at Jonathan. Company policy prohibits religious solicitation, and I won't have it in my bank. Oh friends, have you ever heard someone quote policy? Like scripture, but without the spirit. Because that room knew the truth. The only thing solicited today was kindness. The only thing being rejected was judgment. And that's when Marcus Washington, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. His calm demeanor now carried something sharper. Purpose. Ma'am, he said evenly, I don't see any religious solicitation happening here. I see a customer being discriminated against for his personal beliefs. The words landed like a gavel. Not angry, not emotional, just true. And everyone in that room knew it. Then, James Morrison. Yes, that James Morrison stepped forward. CEO of Morrison Financial Group. He extended a business card toward Jonathan. "I've heard about your work," he said, smiling. "I'd love to explore partnership opportunities." Can you imagine? That right in the middle of chaos favor shows up. The kind of opportunity that most executives chase for months, now offered freely. Jonathan accepted the card, his face serene. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," he said gently. "But I'm just here to open a foundation account to better serve families in need." And just like that, with simple humility, he reminded everyone he hadn't come to cause a scene. He'd come to serve, and the only scene being caused was by the very person who couldn't see the goodness standing right in front of her. The soft chime of the lobby doors barely finished echoing before Margaret Whitmore stepped inside her heels, clicking with quiet precision against the polished marble floor. The air thick with tension did not faze her. Years of navigating corporate crises had trained her to read a room faster than most people could scan a memo. And right now, she didn't need more than a glance to recognize that something serious had unfolded, something involving her branch manager. A swarm of agitated clients and one calm figure at the eye of the storm. A man wearing a simple cross around his neck. Jonathan Roumie, Victoria Hale. The branch manager stiffened at the sight of her regional supervisor. Her usual confidence, so firm just minutes ago, evaporated like steam. Her voice had wielded power earlier. Now it felt brittle hollow. The memory of Sarah Chen's letter still hung in the air like a verdict. And that business card, the one from the would-be donor, might as well have been a signed affidavit of her failure. But Sarah, she didn't shrink back. The same fire that had fueled her stand moments ago still burned in her eyes as she approached Margaret. "Are you the manager?" she asked firmly, her voice steady and clear. "Because I think you should know what just happened." And just like that, Sarah stepped into her full transformation, from voiceless bystander to bold witness. Her courage didn't come from anger. It came from gratitude, the kind of gratitude that flows from grace freely received and too precious to be ignored. As Sarah laid out the story, Margaret's face changed her corporate composure, giving way to something more human alarm. She glanced at Jonathan with a glint of respect, then at Victoria with evident disappointment. She didn't need to hear much more to know the terrain she was standing on. It was dangerous, both legally and morally, and her bank's reputation for inclusivity was now teetering on the edge. Jonathan stood quietly, like a man grounded in something deeper than approval or status. The warmth of his grandmother's cross pulsed gently against his chest, as if reminding him that grace often reveals itself in life's most jarring moments. Persecution, as painful as it is, can sometimes become the seedbed of testimony. Viewers, take a breath here. Let this sink in. A man who'd spent his career portraying mercy and redemption on screen was now embodying those same truths in real life. And the woman who tried to silence his faith, she had unintentionally revealed the spiritual void that made that very faith essential. It wasn't just the lobby that noticed. Hearts were shifting. Marcus Bell, the security guard, felt something stir within. He had always wondered if the time came, would he stand firm in his own faith? Would he have the courage to stay standing when the crowd goes quiet and the spotlight turns uncomfortable? Watching Jonathan now, grace, flowing even under pressure, Marcus felt both challenged and comforted. This was what true discipleship looked like. Margaret Whitmore's voice rang out across the lobby. Calm, commanding. Mr. Roumie, she said, walking straight to Jonathan with a tone usually reserved for diplomats and top clients. I'm Margaret Whitmore, Regional Manager. I want to apologize for what you've experienced today. There it was, more than an apology. It was an unspoken verdict. Victoria's actions weren't just unprofessional, they were unacceptable and possibly unforgivable in a corporate context. Victoria stood frozen. Her pride, once her armor, now felt like dead weight. What she'd assumed was her right to police. Another person's faith had become the undoing of her career. She hadn't just broken protocol. She had violated something deeper, the basic dignity owed to every person. From the far corner of the room, an elderly woman with a walker began making her way forward. Slowly, deliberately. This wasn't just physical movement, it was a moral one. That young man, she said, voice shaking, not with weakness but with conviction, was treated shamefully by your employee. I've banked here for over 40 years and I've never seen anything like it. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Then another voice joined in. This one from James Carter, the businessman whose meeting had been so rudely interrupted. Miss Whitmore, he said, formal and firm, I had just begun discussing partnership with Mr. Roumie when this occurred. His foundation does incredible work. Frankly, I'm shocked. With that, Victoria's error transformed from personal prejudice into a public relations disaster and financial blunder. Jonathan felt something shift, not just in the room, but in the spiritual atmosphere. The humiliation he had endured had become a platform for truth. His grandmother's voice echoed in his heart like a sacred refrain. Meet Joe. God sometimes allows the fire not to destroy you, but to let others see how love walks through flames without burning. And now, standing in the smoke of what was meant to break him, Jonathan wasn't broken. He was radiating. Margaret moved with practiced efficiency, gathering statements from witnesses. Each one told the same story. Jonathan had been quietly, legally, and respectfully conducting bank business when he was targeted for wearing a cross. Her face tightened as she listened. Not from confusion, but from certainty. She knew exactly what she was dealing with, a liability, yes. But more importantly, a moral failure. A moment that could either unravel the bank's reputation or begin to heal it. And friends, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where grace rose higher than hate? Where someone's faith didn't just speak, but shone like a light in the darkness? If you've been there, if you've seen it or lived it, leave a comment below. Let's testify together. Because this story, it's not just Jonathan's. It's yours. It's ours. Stay tuned. Because this turning point was just the beginning. The atmosphere in the bank lobby had shifted entirely. What began as a place of tension and conflict now felt sacred, almost reverent. Customers, once impatient and uncomfortable, stood still as if witnessing something holy, the quiet victory of grace over prejudice. Through Sarah's courageous words and Jonathan's steadfast, calm goodness had broken through like sunlight, piercing storm clouds, rendering institutional pride powerless. What had seemed like an ordinary case of poor customer service had become something unforgettable, an unexpected outpouring of truth spoken in love. Victoria's final defense of her behavior collapsed as Margaret Thompson, the regional manager, finished reviewing the facts. A customer had been denied service, publicly humiliated, and accused of misconduct for nothing more than wearing a religious symbol while conducting legitimate business, with professionalism masking a deep disappointment. Thompson turned to her employee, Miss Sterling. She said, her voice quiet but firm. "Please gather your personal belongings. Your employment with this bank is terminated effective immediately." The words landed with the gentle finality of autumn leaves drifting to the ground, inevitable, and yet not cruel. Jonathan didn't react with satisfaction or vindication. Instead, he watched with a sadness that came from understanding. Victoria's prejudice had ultimately done more damage to herself than to anyone else. He stepped forward, his voice calm. "Miss Thompson," he said, "perhaps this could be a learning opportunity rather than a career-ending moment. We all need grace when we fail." The lobby fell into stunned silence. Here was the man who had just been publicly humiliated interceding for his accuser. Margaret Thompson blinked, caught completely off guard by the sincerity of his plea. In all her years managing personnel, balancing profits with people, she had never encountered anything quite like this. "Mr. Roumie," she said slowly, trying to process what she was hearing, "are you seriously advocating for the woman who just discriminated against you and caused this entire scene?" Her question lingered in the air like rising incense, carrying with it disbelief, awe, and the uncomfortable realization that something holy was unfolding in front of them. Not religious performance, not corporate policy, but real, raw grace. The silence deepened. Sarah Chen felt her throat tighten as tears formed in her eyes. This was the same mercy that had saved her family, the same compassion that had rescued her during their darkest moment. And now it was being extended again, this time to someone who most would say didn't deserve it. But that was the point. Jonathan's faith wasn't about fairness or retaliation. It was love without condition, generosity without spotlight, mercy without demand. Victoria remained frozen in place, her mind struggling to comprehend why someone she had just tried to discredit would now speak in her defense. The very cross necklace that had ignited her contempt now glowed with a different meaning. No longer a symbol of division, but one of forgiveness, so undeserved it left her speechless. Her defiance melted into confusion, and for the first time during the entire ordeal, she said nothing. Tears welled up in her eyes. Margaret Thompson, still trying to grasp the depth of what had just occurred, softened her tone. "Mr. Roumie," she said gently, "your compassion speaks volumes. While we cannot ignore discrimination in our institution, I'm willing to consider a different course, one rooted in education and growth instead of punishment, if you're genuinely advocating for a second chance." The chance for redemption hung silently in the air, a fragile bridge between justice and mercy. Jonathan turned to Victoria, his eyes holding no anger or bitterness, despite the pain she had caused him. "I believe everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow from their mistakes," he said softly, his voice carrying the same compassion that had made his portrayal of Jesus so memorable to millions. Perhaps this experience will help you understand that faith is meant to bring people together, not divide them. His words were not meant to be insulting, but healing. Businessman James Morrison stepped forward, his face showing the emotion the entire hall shared. In my 30 years as a business leader, he said, I have never seen such a profound display of compassion. Mr. Roumie, the way you handle discrimination says more about true leadership than any MBA course. The statement confirmed what everyone had already felt, a compelling lesson in how to turn hatred into healing through the power of unconditional love. Marcus Washington. The security guard could not hide his emotion as he watched Jonathan forgive Victoria. So he said softly, that is true faith. It is not just words, it is lived. This testimony came from a man of experience who knew the difference between form and truth. Sarah Chen stepped gently toward Victoria. The memory of the mercy she had received urged her to reach out to the one who had caused her pain. I know what it's like to need a second chance, she said softly, turning her sincere gaze to Victoria. This man gave my family hope when we had nothing left. Maybe now you'll understand why that faith is so important to us. Sarah's words were like a bridge between the victim and the one who had hurt her, breaking down a barrier that had seemed insurmountable. Margaret Thompson felt deeply that she was witnessing something that would change the way she led forever. A living demonstration of grace that turned an enemy into an opportunity for growth. Miss Sterling, she said to Victoria, Roumie has given you a special gift. If you're truly willing to change, we can work together to develop a new path diversity training community service instead of terminating your contract today. Victoria's voice broke like a frozen stream. I don't understand why you're helping me after what I did. She told Jonathan, her prejudices crumbling like walls. I was wrong. Wrong about you, about faith, about everything. It was the first step in a journey that no one in the hall could have foreseen. And then the unexpected happened. Victoria removed her expensive earrings, slid her designer watch off her wrist, and walked over to Jonathan, her hands shaking. I want to make a donation to your charity, she said, her voice breaking. Not because I have to, but because I want to understand what kind of faith could create such love. It wasn't just a donation, it was a surrender to the grace she had resisted. Jonathan accepted the gift with the same humility he had displayed all morning. Thank you, Victoria, he said, using her name for the first time in a friendly way. This will help families in need of hope. And that's what faith is all about, turning the worst of times into opportunities to serve others. Applause erupted in the hall, a celebration of grace. Margaret Thompson wiped away tears as she watched the seemingly impossible reconciliation. Mr. Roumie, she said it would be an honor if your charity became a client of our bank. And if you agree, Ms. Sterling would be the one to care for the account as part of the learning process. It was an institutional commitment to what everyone had just witnessed. Victoria nodded through her tears, understanding that she was not only being rehabilitated professionally, but also embarking on a journey of profound inner transformation. It would be an honor for me to serve your organization, she said, her voice devoid of any trace of the initial hostility. And I would like to learn more about a faith that could be this alive. The request was not a formality, it was a complete surrender to unconditional love. Sarah Chen approached the group surrounding Jonathan, her heart filled with gratitude as she witnessed the living power of the faith that had saved her family. "This is real Christianity," she said, looking at the customers who were still wiping away tears. "It's not judgment or exclusion, but love that turns enemies into friends." The words were a blessing that capped off a miraculous transformation. Marcus Washington shook Jonathan's hand, his voice cracking. "So today, you showed me what real courage is. Not resistance, but love." 3 months later, Victoria Sterling stood before the bank's board of directors presenting a new community engagement program. She had gone from a racist manager to a compassionate leader, a living testament to the power of grace both received and given. The charity she ran had helped more than 200 families, each case handled with the same compassion Jonathan had once given her. She shows photos of the families she's helped, but the one she talks about most emotionally is always the day a cross necklace changed her understanding of faith. Jonathan's organization is now the bank's top strategic partner, and Victoria is its staunchest supporter, proof that bias can become purpose when touched by grace. She now wears a cross necklace too, not to show off, but as a daily reminder that true faith produces love, not judgment. On her desk is nothing but a photo. The moment she and Jonathan shook hands in the bank lobby that day. Sarah Chen has also made good on a promise, creating a support group for families with medical debt that meets monthly in the bank's community room. Victoria attends regularly, sharing her story and helping connect families to resources. The woman who once wanted to stamp out faith is now its biggest advocate, proving that God's grace can reach even the hardest hearts. The bank lobby that once echoed with racism is now the site of quarterly faith and community dialogues where people of all faiths discuss how to live more tolerantly and realistically. Marcus Washington often leads the conversation because he understands when a conversation needs protection and courage, where tension once rang. Laughter, compassion, and genuine community transcend religious boundaries. Jonathan continues his quiet work, helping families while filming The Chosen. But he knows that day at the bank was no accident. It was living proof that his grandmother's necklace is not just a keepsake, but a powerful testament. He learned that persecution can be a powerful witness when met with grace, and that sometimes God allows faith to be tested in order to be proven in the clearest way. To him, Victoria's transformation is more important than any success of the foundation because it reminds him that no heart is beyond the reach of divine love. Your Story Radio thanks you for joining us on this story. What do you think of Jonathan's reaction? When your faith is challenged, do you choose resistance or love? Share in the comments your experiences with faith, forgiveness, and transformational moments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next touching stories.